I thought I knew my family. But then, I got a call that shattered everything. My son-in-law took my Range Rover for a spin, and minutes later, the police were on the line. The ground beneath me just gave way. You know, I need to share this with you because maybe, just maybe, you'll see yourself in my story or recognize someone you love heading down this same painful road. If this resonates with you, would you hit that like button and subscribe? These stories need to reach the people who need them most, and your support helps make that happen. Sometimes we feel so alone in our struggles, but we're not. We're truly not. Let me take you back to that morning in Chicago, my home for 43 years. The autumn air had that crisp bite to it, the kind that makes you pull your cardigan a little tighter around your shoulders. I was standing in my kitchen, the one with the yellow curtains I'd sewn myself back in '89, watching the maple tree in my backyard drop its leaves like tears. The morning light filtered through those curtains, casting everything in a golden hue that should have felt peaceful, but instead felt melancholic, like the world was trying to comfort me for something I didn't yet know was coming. I'd just finished my second cup of coffee, the strong kind my late husband used to make fun of me for drinking. He'd say, "Margaret, that stuff could wake the dead." I smiled at the memory, but it was a hollow smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach your eyes when you've forgotten what real joy feels like. The coffee mug in my hands, a Mother's Day gift from years ago, the words "World's Best Mom" now faded from countless washings, felt heavy, like it was made of lead instead of ceramic. I set it down on the counter, next to the crossword puzzle I'd started but couldn't focus on. My mind kept wandering to that phone call from the night before. My daughter Rachel had called the night before. Her voice had that familiar tone, the one that meant she wanted something but was trying to sound casual about it. I'd learned to recognize it over the years, the same way you learn to recognize the sound of rain before it starts, just from the quality of the wind. "Mom," she'd said, "Brett really admires your Range Rover. He's thinking about getting one himself. Would you mind if he took it for a test drive tomorrow? Just around the neighborhood, you know how it is." There had been something else in her voice, too, something I'd chosen to ignore at the time. A slight tension, like she was reading from a script someone else had written. Like she was asking not because she wanted to, but because she'd been told to. But I'd pushed that thought away, buried it under layers of maternal instinct that said, "Trust your daughter, believe the best in people, don't be paranoid." Brett. My son-in-law of 5 years, the man who'd swept my Rachel off her feet with his charm and his promises. I remembered the first time she'd brought him home for dinner, how he'd arrived with flowers for me and a bottle of expensive wine, how he'd complimented everything from my pot roast to the photos on my mantel. "Your home is so warm, Margaret," he'd said, "so authentic. Not like these modern places with no soul." I'd been charmed, I admit it. Here was a man who appreciated tradition, who valued family, who seemed to cherish my daughter the way she deserved. The man who always had a business deal cooking, always on the verge of that big break that never quite materialized. Consulting, he called it. But when I'd asked him once, trying to show genuine interest, what exactly he consulted on, his answer had been vague, full of buzzwords that sounded impressive but meant nothing. Synergy, market optimization, strategic growth initiatives. I'd nodded and smiled, not wanting to seem ignorant, but the truth was I had no idea what he actually did all day. But he had kind eyes, I'd thought. Brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, that looked at Rachel like she was the only person in the room. And Rachel loved him, so I loved him too. That's what mothers do, isn't it? We extend our love like a bridge, hoping it'll carry everyone safely across. We want our children to be happy so desperately that we'll convince ourselves their choices are good ones, even when everything in our gut screams otherwise. I'd said yes, of course. The Range Rover, a sleek black beauty I'd bought myself 3 years ago with money I'd saved from my late husband's life insurance, sat in my driveway like a promise. like proof that I'd survived the worst thing that could happen to a person and come out the other side still capable of living, still deserving of nice things. I'd earned that car. After 40 years of teaching elementary school, after grading papers at midnight and buying supplies with my own money when the school budget ran out, after staying late for parent conferences and arriving early to set up classrooms, after raising 3 children, mostly on my own while my husband worked doubles at the factory, after sacrificing vacations and new clothes and simple luxuries, I'd finally bought myself something beautiful, something that made me feel, for just a moment, like I mattered, like I was more than just a mother, more than just a teacher, more than just a widow. I was Margaret Anderson, and I drove a Range Rover. The car represented something deeper too, though I'd never said it out loud. It was proof that I could take care of myself, that I didn't need anyone else to provide for me or make decisions for me. After my husband died, well-meaning friends and family members had treated me like I was suddenly incompetent, like widowhood had robbed me not just of a spouse, but of basic life skills. Let me help you with that. Are you sure you should be doing this alone? Maybe you should ask Jason about this decision. As if I hadn't been running a household and managing a career for decades. The Range Rover was my declaration of independence. I'd chosen it, financed it, and paid it off, all on my own. Brett arrived at 10 in the morning. I'd been watching for him from the living room window, my 3rd cup of coffee growing cold on the side table. When his car pulled up, a leased BMW, I'd later learn, paid for with money he'd borrowed from Rachel's credit cards, I felt that flutter of anxiety in my chest again, the one I'd been trying to ignore since the phone call. He was wearing designer jeans and a leather jacket that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Everything about Brett was expensive, from his watch to his shoes to the cologne that announced his presence before he even rang the doorbell. His smile was wide, confident. Those teeth, too perfect to be real, I'd later think. But that morning, I just saw my son-in-law, handsome and charming as always. "Margaret, you're a lifesaver," he said, kissing my cheek. The cologne was overwhelming this close, something woody and aggressive that made my nose itch. "Rachel's told me 1,000 times what a generous woman you are. I really appreciate this. I've been looking at Rovers for months, but you know how it is? You need to really feel them on the road before you commit to a purchase this big." I felt a warm glow at that. Generous. Yes, I'd always been generous. My mother had taught me that generosity was a virtue, that giving freely was what good people did. Some of my earliest memories were of her making extra portions of dinner to take to neighbors who were struggling, of her donating clothes we could barely afford to replace to people who had even less. "Be generous, Margaret," she'd say. "The world is hard enough without us being stingy with each other." "Maybe too generous," a small voice whispered in the back of my mind, but I pushed it away. That voice had been getting louder lately, pointing out things I didn't want to see. The way Brett never seemed to have his wallet when we went out to dinner. The way he'd ask to borrow small amounts, 20 here, 50 there, that somehow never got paid back. The way Rachel had stopped talking about her job and her own dreams, and now only talked about Brett's plans, Brett's ideas, Brett's needs. "Come in for a minute," I said. "Let me get the keys. Can I offer you some coffee?" "No time," he said, but his smile stayed wide. "Got a lot on my plate today. This is really just a quick spin around the block, check out the handling, you know. Then I've got meetings lined up all afternoon." I wondered, not for the first time, what these meetings were. Who was he meeting with? What were they discussing? But asking felt invasive, like I was questioning his credibility, so I kept my mouth shut. I handed him the keys. They felt heavy in my palm, heavier than they should have been. The key fob was cool against my skin, and I had a sudden, irrational urge to close my fist around it and refuse to let go. "Just be careful," I said. "The roads can be slick with all these leaves. And watch the blind spots. The mirrors take some getting used to." He winked at me. "Always am, Mom. Always am." He'd started calling me Mom about a year into his marriage to Rachel. At first, it had warmed my heart, this inclusion into his vocabulary of family. Now, hearing it, I felt something else. A kind of presumption, maybe, like he was claiming a relationship he hadn't quite earned. I watched him slide into the driver's seat, adjusting the mirrors, running his hands over the leather steering wheel like he was already imagining it was his. He spent a long moment familiarizing himself with the controls, pressing buttons, adjusting the seat with the electric controls, tilting the steering wheel up and down. The seat went all the way back with a mechanical whir. He was 6'2" to my 5'4", and watching my car adjust to accommodate him felt oddly violating, like watching a stranger rearrange furniture in my bedroom. The engine purred to life, and he gave me a thumbs up before pulling out of my driveway. Not carefully, not slowly, like someone unfamiliar with a vehicle, but fast, with a little squeal of the tires that made Mrs. Chen look up from her garden 3 doors down. I watched him slide into the driver's seat, adjusting the mirrors, running his hands over the leather steering wheel like he was already imagining it was his. The engine purred to life, and he gave me a thumbs up before pulling out of my driveway. I stood there on my front porch, the one with the swing my husband had built before the cancer took him, and I felt something I couldn't name. Unease, maybe, or prescience. The morning was still beautiful, the autumn sun warm on my face, but I felt cold. I wrapped my cardigan tighter and went inside, but I couldn't settle. I tried to go back to my crossword puzzle, but the clues might as well have been written in a foreign language. I wandered from room to room, straightening things that didn't need straightening, checking the time every few minutes on the wall clock in the kitchen. 23 minutes later, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, local, but not one I recognized. I almost didn't answer, thinking it was another one of those scam calls about my car's extended warranty or some fake IRS emergency. I'd gotten 3 just this week, automated voices warning me about consequences I'd face if I didn't call back immediately. But something made me pick up. Maybe it was the same instinct that had made me feel uneasy watching Brett drive away. Maybe it was just luck, or the opposite of luck. "Mrs. Anderson?" a stern male voice asked. "Yes, this is she." My heart was already starting to race, that primal response to a tone that means trouble. "This is Officer Williams from the Chicago Police Department. We have your son-in-law, Brett Morrison, in custody. He was driving your vehicle at excessive speeds through a school zone and nearly caused a collision with a crossing guard and several children." The world tilted. I grabbed the kitchen counter to steady myself, my knuckles turning white against the granite. The room spun, and for a moment I thought I might actually faint. I'd never fainted in my life, not even when the doctor told me my husband had 6 months to live. Not even at his funeral when I'd had to stand strong for my children. But this moment, this phone call, it knocked the breath out of me like a physical blow. "I'm sorry." "What?" The words came out as a whisper. I couldn't have heard him right. Not Brett, not in a school zone, not endangering children. "Your Range Rover, ma'am. License plate number—" "I know my license plate," I interrupted, my voice rising despite myself. The number was burned into my memory from filling out registration forms, from insurance paperwork, from the pride of ownership. Is anyone hurt? Are the children okay? Please tell me the children are okay. Everyone's safe, thankfully. Officer Williams's voice softened slightly, like he could hear the panic in my voice. But Mr. Morrison was clocked at 58 miles per hour in a 20-mile-per-hour zone. He also failed to stop at 2 stop signs and ran a red light. When we pulled him over, he was belligerent and refused to cooperate. "We need you to come down to the station." Belligerent. The word echoed in my head. Brett, who was always so charming, so smooth, so good at talking his way into and out of situations. What did it take to make someone like that belligerent with police officers? I don't remember hanging up the phone. I don't remember grabbing my purse or locking my door. The next thing I knew, I was stumbling down my driveway, my legs shaky, my vision blurred with tears I didn't remember starting to cry. The keys to my old sedan, the one I'd kept even after buying the Range Rover because you never know when you might need a backup, were in my hand, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't fit the key in the door. "Margaret, what's wrong?" Mrs. Chen was suddenly there, her face creased with concern. She'd lived 3 doors down for 15 years, and we'd shared countless cups of tea, countless conversations over the fence between our yards. She was more than a neighbor. She was a friend. It's Brett, the police, my car. I couldn't form coherent sentences. "Get in," she said firmly, guiding me to her small Toyota. "You're shaking like a leaf, Margaret. You can't drive like this. Tell me where we're going." The police station smelled like burned coffee and floor cleaner. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making everything look washed out and surreal. The building was old, probably built in the 70s, with that industrial beige paint that institutions love and linoleum floors that squeaked under our shoes. Everything about it felt cold, impersonal, frightening in a way I couldn't articulate. Brett was in an interrogation room, I was told. The officer who'd called me, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a kind face, explained what had happened. Officer Williams looked like someone's dad, with graying hair and lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. "Your son-in-law refused a breathalyzer test, which in Illinois means an automatic license suspension. He also had no insurance card on him and claimed he didn't need one because he was just testing the vehicle." "Testing it by endangering children?" I heard myself say. The words came out sharp, bitter. This wasn't my voice. I didn't sound like this. I was the woman who mediated playground disputes, who used gentle words to redirect bad behavior, who believed in second chances and benefit of the doubt. Officer Williams looked at me with something like sympathy. He'd probably had this conversation 1,000 times, with 1,000 different families learning hard truths about people they loved. "Ma'am, between you and me, this doesn't look like a joyride gone wrong. The route he took, the speed, the recklessness. We see this kind of thing sometimes. People trying to total a vehicle for insurance purposes, or trying to provoke a police chase for the adrenaline. Or sometimes," he paused, looking uncomfortable, "sometimes it's about making a point, showing power, disrespecting someone's property because they can." The words hung in the air between us. Disrespecting someone's property. Was that what this was? Not an accident, not poor judgment, but a deliberate act of disrespect? That's when I saw Brett through the window of the interrogation room. He wasn't hanging his head in shame. He wasn't wringing his hands in worry. He was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, looking almost bored. Like he was waiting for a delayed flight, not sitting in police custody after endangering children. When he saw me, he didn't look apologetic. He looked annoyed, like I was the inconvenience in all of this. His eyes met mine through the glass, and there was something in them I'd never seen before. Or maybe I had seen it, but I'd been calling it by different names. Confidence, self-assurance. When really, it had always been this: contempt. Something inside me cracked. Not broke, not yet, but cracked, like ice on a frozen lake when the temperature starts to rise. Like something that had been frozen solid for a long time was finally starting to shift, to change, to break apart. I felt it physically, a sensation in my chest like something giving way. They released him into my custody with a court date and a stack of citations. The officer handed me the papers in a manila folder, and I saw the numbers. Fines that would total thousands of dollars. A court date 3 weeks away. Multiple charges, each one detailed in cold, legal language that somehow made it all more real. Brett didn't offer to pay. He didn't even offer to explain. As we stood outside the station, the October wind cutting through my thin sweater, he finally spoke. Mrs. Chen had left after making sure I was okay, pressing my hand and whispering, "Call me if you need anything. Anything at all. Look, Margaret, these things happen. Brett's voice was casual, dismissive. "I'll fight the tickets. It's all overblown anyway. Cops in this city have nothing better to do than harass decent people. Decent people don't drive 58 in a school zone," I said quietly. He shrugged. The gesture was so casual, so unconcerned. "You going to lecture me too? Because Rachel's already on my case, and I don't need it from you." So he'd already talked to Rachel. When? How? He'd been in custody. Had they let him make a phone call? And he'd called my daughter, not to tell her he was okay, not to apologize, but to what? Get his story in first. Start building his defense? Rachel, my daughter. I pulled out my phone and called her. She answered on the first ring. "Mom, is Brett okay? Is he hurt?" Not a word about the children who could have been hurt, not a question about how I was feeling, not acknowledgement that my car, my property, had been used in this reckless act. Just concern for Brett. "He's fine," I said, my voice flat. "He's getting citations for reckless driving and endangering children. I'm at the police station." "Oh God, Mom, I'm so sorry." He texted me that the cops pulled him over for nothing. He said it was harassment. "Rachel, honey, he was going 58 in a school zone. The speed limit signs were clearly posted. He ran stop signs and a red light." Silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Then, well, maybe the speed limit was unclear. Brett's not from that neighborhood. And there it was, the excuse, the justification. My intelligent, rational daughter who'd graduated summa cum laude, who'd built a successful career, who I'd raised to think critically and stand up for what was right, was making excuses for inexcusable behavior. I closed my eyes. The crack inside me widened. Rachel, whose hand I'd held on her first day of kindergarten. Rachel, who'd cried because she didn't want me to leave her, who'd clung to my leg until the teacher gently pried her away. Rachel, who I'd stayed up with through countless nights of colic and teething and bad dreams. Rachel, who'd had night terrors as a toddler and would only calm down when I sang to her, the same lullaby my mother had sung to me. Rachel, who I'd worked double shifts to send to college, who I'd been so proud of when she'd gotten that scholarship, when she'd made the dean's list, when she'd gotten her first real job. Rachel, who was now making excuses for a man who'd endangered children while driving my car. "I have to go," I said. "I'll talk to you later." "Mom, wait." But I hung up. I couldn't do it. Couldn't hear whatever else she was going to say in Brett's defense. When I hung up, Brett was already walking away, phone to his ear, laughing about something. Not worried about the court date, not concerned about the fines, not ashamed of what he'd done. The sound of his laughter, carried back to me on the October wind, felt like another slap. Mrs. Chen drove me to the impound lot. The facility was in an industrial part of the city I'd never been to, all chain-link fences and concrete, surrounded by auto body shops and warehouses. I paid the fee with my credit card, the one I tried to keep clear for emergencies. This qualified, I supposed. The clerk barely looked at me, just ran the card and had me sign a form. $350, gone, just like that. When I finally got behind the wheel of my Range Rover, I just sat there for a moment. The seat was pushed all the way back. Brett was 6'2" to my 5'4". The mirrors were all wrong, angled for someone much taller. The radio was blasting some station I never listened to, aggressive rock music that made my head hurt. Even the air inside smelled different, like his cologne and something else. Entitlement, maybe. Disrespect. I started adjusting everything back to my settings, and that's when I noticed other things. The gas tank was nearly empty. I'd filled it 2 days ago. Where had he driven? The GPS history, I'd learned how to check it when I first got the car, showed he'd been all over the city. Not just around the neighborhood like he'd said. Like Rachel had said when she'd asked. He'd driven downtown, to the north side, taken the highway to God knows where. In 23 minutes, he'd put over 40 miles on my car, driving like a maniac, racing around the city like he owned it. I drove home slowly, carefully, checking my mirrors obsessively. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Every school zone made my heart race. I found myself going 5 miles under the speed limit, earning honks from impatient drivers behind me, but I didn't care. The thought of doing what Brett had done, of driving recklessly near children, made me physically ill. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I turned off the engine and just sat there as the sun began to set, painting my quiet street in shades of amber and gold. The maple tree in my yard cast long shadows across the lawn. Mrs. Chen waved at me from her window, and I waved back, trying to smile. Normal. Everything was normal. Except nothing was normal anymore. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Mom, can we talk? Brett feels terrible. He wants to apologize." But there was no apology in the text. No acknowledgement of what had actually happened. Just Brett feels terrible, like his feelings were the priority. Like my violated trust, my endangered property, my shattered peace of mind were all secondary to making sure Brett felt okay. I didn't respond. Instead, I went inside, made myself a cup of chamomile tea with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, and sat at my kitchen table. The same table where I'd helped my children with homework, where I'd spent hours with Rachel, teaching her multiplication tables, helping her with book reports, quizzing her for spelling tests. The same table where my husband and I had paid bills and planned modest vacations we usually couldn't afford. The same table where I'd sat alone after his funeral, wondering how I'd go on. On my refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like the Chicago skyline, was a photo from Rachel's wedding. Brett and Rachel in the center, glowing with happiness. Me on Rachel's right side, wearing the dress I'd splurged on, smiling so wide my cheeks hurt. I'd been so happy that day, so hopeful, so certain that this man would take care of my daughter, would be the partner she deserved. I remembered that day so clearly. The ceremony in the little chapel, Rachel in her grandmother's veil, the one I'd worn and my mother had worn before me. 3 generations of women, married in the same veil. I'd cried when Rachel asked to wear it, cried with joy that she wanted to carry on the tradition. The reception at the hotel downtown, modest but elegant. The first dance, Rachel and Brett swaying together while everyone watched and smiled. Brett's toast to me during the reception came back now with new clarity. To Margaret, the most generous mother-in-law a guy could ask for. I promise to take care of Rachel the way you've taken care of her all these years. You've set an impossible standard, but I'll do my best to live up to it. Everyone had applauded. I'd felt proud, validated, certain that I'd raised a daughter who'd chosen well. Now, looking at that photo, I saw something I'd missed before. The way Brett's hand was possessively on Rachel's waist. The way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The way Rachel was leaning into him, seeking approval even on her own wedding day. The way I'd interpreted his words, calling me generous, making promises. I'd heard love and respect. But maybe what he'd really been saying was, I found an easy mark. I found a family I can use. I thought about all the times over the past 5 years when I'd overlooked things. Small things, I'd told myself. Little red flags that I'd painted over with the colors of hope and family loyalty. The time Brett had borrowed $2,000 for a business opportunity that never materialized. He'd come to me with spreadsheets, projections, professional-looking documents that promised a 30% return in 6 months. I'd wanted to believe him, wanted to be the supportive mother-in-law who helped her daughter's husband succeed. The money had disappeared into some investment fund I could never quite get details about. The way he'd roll his eyes when Rachel talked about her job. She'd been so proud of her work at the marketing firm, but Brett would make little comments. Do you really need to work those hours? Seems like busy work to me. Wouldn't your time be better spent supporting my projects? Gradually, I'd watched her confidence erode, watched her stop talking about her achievements, watched her world shrink to fit inside Brett's orbit. The jokes he made about how I was old-fashioned for still writing checks instead of using apps, always said with a smile, always couched as teasing. But there was an edge to it, an implication that I was behind the times, out of touch, not quite smart enough to keep up with the modern world. It had made me doubt myself, made me feel like maybe I was being silly for preferring the tangible reality of a checkbook to the abstract numbers on a screen. The way he'd helped himself to wine from my cellar without asking, always the expensive bottles. My husband had been a wine enthusiast, nothing fancy, but he'd carefully collected bottles for special occasions. After he died, I'd kept them, not drinking them myself, but preserving them like artifacts from our life together. Brett would go down to the basement and come up with a bottle that my husband had been saving, crack it open like it was nothing. Rachel would say, "Brett appreciates good wine, Mom. Dad would have wanted someone to enjoy them." And I'd said nothing, just watch this man consume pieces of my past without permission, without thought. The time he'd used my credit card, which Rachel had access to for emergencies, to take his friends to a fancy steakhouse, then acted offended when I questioned the $500 charge. I'd given Rachel access years ago, back when she was in college, for true emergencies. A car breakdown, a medical expense, something unexpected. She'd used it responsibly then. But after she married Brett, there had been charges I didn't recognize. And when I'd asked about this one, Brett had gotten on the phone. "You raised Rachel to be generous," he'd said. "Guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." Like my own values were being used as a weapon against me. Like teaching my daughter to be kind meant I had no right to question a $500 dinner I hadn't been invited to. And I'd let it go. Because family, right? Because making waves was worse than keeping the peace. Because I'd already lost my husband and I couldn't bear to lose my daughter too. The thought of Rachel pulling away, of holidays spent alone, of birthdays uncelebrated, of grandchildren I might never get to know. It terrified me more than financial loss, more than disrespect, more than the slow erosion of my dignity. But sitting there in my kitchen, as the shadows grew longer and the tea grew cold, I realized something that made my chest tighten with a pain that had nothing to do with my heart medication. I'd been afraid of being alone, afraid of being seen as difficult, afraid of being the bitter old woman who couldn't just be happy for her daughter's choices. That fear had cost me. Not just money, though there was that too. It had cost me my self-respect, my voice, my ability to draw a line and say, this far and no further. I'd been so busy being generous, being understanding, being flexible, that I'd bent myself into a shape I no longer recognized. The next morning, I called my lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chen, no relation to my neighbor who'd helped me with my will. "I need to talk to you about protecting my assets," I said. She made time for me that afternoon. In her office, surrounded by law books and degrees that reminded me of the professional world I'd left behind when I retired, I laid it all out. The car incident, the borrowed money, the pattern of disrespect. Patricia listened, taking notes, her face growing more concerned. She was younger than me, maybe in her early 50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a direct manner I appreciated. She'd handled my husband's estate, had helped me navigate the legal maze of widowhood, had always treated me with respect and never condescension. "Margaret," she said when I finished, "what you're describing sounds like financial exploitation. Have you considered that your son-in-law might be systematically taking advantage of your generosity?" I wanted to deny it, to defend him, defend Rachel's choice, defend my own judgment, but I couldn't. The truth was sitting there between us like a living thing, ugly and undeniable. We spent the next 2 hours going through my finances. Patricia pulled up bank statements on her computer, asked me about every unusual charge, every transfer, every loan. "Have you documented these? Do you have anything in writing? Text messages requesting money?" I showed her everything I had, years of texts from Brett. "Just need a little help with rent this month. Car payment came up short. Can you spot me? Rachel's birthday is coming up, and I want to get her something nice. Can you help me out?" Always polite, always with a reason that seemed legitimate in isolation. But when Patricia laid them all out in a spreadsheet, the pattern was undeniable. Borrow, promise to pay back, never pay back. Borrow again. The amounts had been gradually increasing too, started with 100 here, 200 there. By last year, he was asking for thousands at a time. Patricia helped me change passwords, set up new accounts, remove Rachel's emergency access to my credit cards. Every action felt like a betrayal, but also like a life raft. I was 67 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was putting myself first. When I got home, there was a message on my answering machine. I still used a landline, another thing Brett liked to mock. Margaret, who even has a landline anymore? What are you, 90? It was Rachel, her voice tight with anger. Mom, my credit card got declined at the grocery store. What's going on? Did you cancel my access to your account? I sat down heavily in my armchair, the one with the worn armrest where my husband used to rest his head when he watched the evening news. My hands found that spot now, seeking comfort from a ghost. The fabric was smooth there, worn down by years of contact, and touching it usually made me feel connected to him. But today, I just felt alone. I called Rachel back. We need to talk, I said. She came over that evening, alone. Brett's at a business meeting, she said, though her eyes slid away from mine when she said it. I'd learned to recognize that look, the one that meant she was covering for him, protecting him from criticism. I made us coffee, and we sat in my living room, the one I'd decorated with care over decades, each piece of furniture a memory, each photo on the wall, a chapter of a life I'd built, brick by brick. Rachel looked around like she was seeing it all for the first time, or maybe like she was preparing to say goodbye to it. Mom, what's going on? She asked. First you won't pay Brett's tickets. Now you've cut off my emergency access. Are you mad at me? I'm not mad, honey, I said. I'm protecting myself. From what? From us? From being used. I said it gently, but the words still landed hard. Rachel's face went white, then red. That's not fair. We've never used you. I pulled out my laptop, another purchase Brett had scoffed at. Who needs a computer at your age, Margaret? Just use your phone. But I'd wanted it, so I'd bought it. And now I opened a spreadsheet Patricia had helped me create. A detailed list of every loan, every paid bill, every gift that was never reciprocated, every financial request from Brett over 5 years. The total was staggering. $43,217. Rachel stared at the screen. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Mom, that can't be right. Every entry is documented. Bank statements, texts requesting money, receipts. I scrolled through, showing her the evidence. Here's the $2,000 for the business opportunity. Here's the $500 for your birthday gift. Here's the rent money, the car payment, the insurance bill. Here's the emergency dental work that your insurance should have covered. Here's the trip to see Brett's sick mother, who, I later learned, has been dead for 10 years. Some of that was gifts, she said weakly. Birthday presents, Christmas. Gifts go both ways, sweetheart. When was the last time Brett gave me a birthday present? Or you, for that matter. Her face crumpled. That's not fair. We're struggling. We don't have your income. I get a teacher's pension, Rachel. $38,000 a year. I live modestly because that's all I can afford. I shop sales. I use coupons. I haven't taken a vacation in 5 years. The money I've given you was my safety net. My emergency fund, my retirement savings, money I need for when I can't take care of myself anymore, for when I might need assisted living, or home health care, or any of the 1,000 things that happen when you get old. Well, maybe if you weren't so selfish with it, we wouldn't have to ask. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. Selfish. For 43 years, I'd put everyone else first. I'd bought generic groceries so my kids could have name-brand school supplies. I'd worn the same winter coat for 15 years so they could have new ones. I'd worked through summers when I could have taken time off because they needed braces, music lessons, college applications. I'd given up my dreams of travel, of going back to school, of writing the children's books I'd always wanted to write, because being a mother meant sacrifice. And now I was selfish for stopping. I think you should go, I said quietly. Mom, please, Rachel. I need some time to think. I watched her leave, watched her get into the car Brett had leased with money they didn't have, watched her drive away, Part of me wanted to run after her, to take it all back, to say I was sorry. But I didn't move. I just stood there until the taillights disappeared around the corner. After she left, I sat in the dark for hours. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't turn on the television. I just sat there, feeling the weight of realization settle over me like a heavy blanket. My daughter had called me selfish for refusing to bankrupt myself for her husband's whims. And some part of me, the part that had been conditioned over a lifetime to prioritize everyone else's comfort over my own truth, wanted to apologize. Wanted to call her back and say I was sorry, that I'd keep the account open, that I'd pay Brett's tickets, that I'd be good. But I didn't. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. The weeks that followed were the loneliest I'd ever experienced, and I'd been widowed for 8 years. Rachel didn't call, didn't text, didn't respond to my messages asking if she was okay. My birthday came and went without a word from her. I spent it alone, eating grocery store cake in front of the television, wondering if this was what standing up for myself looked like. If it was, it felt an awful lot like punishment. The silence from Rachel was deafening. I'd wake up every morning and check my phone, hoping for a text, a missed call, anything. But there was nothing. I found myself walking past her old bedroom, the one that still had her high school trophies on the shelf and her prom dress hanging in the closet. I'd stand in the doorway sometimes, remembering the girl who used to live there, before Brett, before everything changed. I wondered constantly if I'd made the right choice. Late at night, when the house was too quiet and my thoughts too loud, I'd replay our last conversation over and over. Had I been too harsh? Should I have been more understanding? Maybe if I'd just paid the tickets, just kept the credit card access open, I could have maintained the relationship while still setting boundaries. But deep down, I knew that wasn't how it worked with people like Brett. He didn't respect boundaries. He saw them as challenges to overcome, obstacles to manipulate around. Mrs. Chen brought me dinner that night, homemade dumplings and soup. She sat with me while I cried into my cake, didn't say anything, just held my hand and let me hurt. "You did the right thing," she said finally, her voice soft. "I know it doesn't feel like it now, but you did." My sister went through something similar with her son-in-law. She didn't set boundaries, and by the time he was done, she'd lost her house. "At least you still have your home, Margaret. At least you still have yourself." My other children, Jason and Linda, both lived out of state. When I called them to tell them what had happened, their reactions were telling. Jason, my practical oldest, said, "Mom, you should have cut them off years ago. We all saw what Brett was doing." "You saw?" I asked. "Why didn't you say something?" "We tried," he said gently. "Remember last Christmas? I pulled you aside and asked if Brett was pulling his weight financially. You got defensive. You said they were just going through a rough patch." I remembered. I'd been angry at Jason for implying that Rachel's marriage wasn't perfect. I'd accused him of being jealous of their lifestyle. Linda, my emotional middle child, cried. She'd been trying to tell me, she said, but she didn't want to upset me. "Mom, I stopped inviting Rachel to visit because every time she came, Brett would find a reason she needed to cut the trip short. He was isolating her from us, from you. We saw it happening, but we didn't know how to stop it." Both of them felt guilty for not intervening, but both of them also understood why I'd let it go on so long. Family loyalty, the fear of being alone, the hope that love could fix everything. It was Linda who said something that stuck with me. "Mom, you taught us that love means sacrifice. But you never taught us that sacrifice has limits. Maybe you need to learn that lesson too." Thanksgiving approached. Usually I hosted. My house would be full of noise and laughter, my kitchen a chaos of cooking and warmth. I'd start preparing days in advance, making pies and prepping vegetables, setting the table with my good china. The dining room table would be extended to its full length, covered with my grandmother's lace tablecloth, set with dishes that only came out for special occasions. Rachel would arrive early to help with the cooking, and we'd spend the morning together in the kitchen, sharing stories and laughter while the turkey roasted and the pies cooled on the counter. But this year was different. This year, the thought of that empty chair where Rachel should be sitting felt unbearable. This year, Jason invited me to Denver, and Linda invited me to Portland. Both of them gentle in their invitations, both of them knowing I was hurting. "Come stay with us, Mom," Jason had said. "You shouldn't be alone." But the thought of traveling felt overwhelming, of packing a bag, boarding a plane, pretending to be festive when my heart was breaking. I decided to stay home, to spend the holiday alone for the first time in 67 years. The decision felt both brave and cowardly. Brave because I was choosing to face my loneliness head-on rather than running from it. Cowardly because part of me worried that if I left my house, if I went away for the holiday, Rachel might try to reach out, and I wouldn't be there to answer. The day before Thanksgiving, my doorbell rang. I almost didn't answer. I was in my bathrobe at 2 p.m, having given up on pretending everything was fine. But the bell rang again, insistent, so I shuffled to the door and looked through the peephole. A woman I didn't recognize stood on my porch. She was younger than me, maybe early 50s, with sharp features and an expensive haircut. Next to her was a teenage girl, maybe 16 or 17, wearing ripped jeans and a leather jacket that looked a lot like the one Brett had been wearing the day he crashed my car. Not crashed, I reminded myself, recklessly endangered while driving. I opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" "Mrs. Anderson, I'm Diane Morrison, Brett's ex-wife. This is our daughter, Alexis." The world tilted again, like it had that day at the police station. Ex-wife. Daughter? Brett had been married before Rachel. How had I not known this? Had he lied about it? Had Rachel known and kept it from me? "Can we come in?" Diane asked. "I promise we're not here to cause trouble. Actually, we're here to help." Every instinct told me to close the door, to protect myself from whatever new revelation was coming. But something in Diane's eyes, a kind of weary recognition, made me step back and let them in. We sat in my living room, 3 women connected by one man's deception. Diane and Alexis perched on my sofa, and I took my usual chair, the one with the view of the maple tree now bare of leaves. "Mrs. Anderson," Diane began. "Margaret," I corrected. "Please." "Margaret, I'm going to be direct because you deserve that. Brett is a con artist. He's charming and handsome and knows exactly how to make people feel special, but underneath all that, he's a parasite. He married me when I had money. He bled me dry. When I finally divorced him 3 years ago, he walked away with half my business, my house, and my retirement savings. Then he disappeared. I didn't know he'd remarried until Alexis showed me an article about the incident with your car. Alexis pulled out her phone and showed me a local news website. I hadn't known they'd covered it, but there it was. Man arrested for reckless driving in school zone. And there was Brett's mugshot, looking defiant, even in police custody. "Mom's been tracking him," Alexis said. Her voice was hard, older than her years, making sure he doesn't pull the same crap with someone else. "When we saw your name, I recognized it. Brett used to talk about his new wife's rich mom all the time. Said you had a pension and life insurance money and a house worth a fortune." I felt sick. The room spun. "Is that why he married Rachel?" Diane's face softened. "I can't say for sure. Maybe he does love her in his way. But Brett's way of loving people involves using them up until there's nothing left." Then he moves on. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Margaret, I need you to understand something. When Brett and I were married, he did the exact same things. Started borrowing money from my mother. Alienated me from my friends and family. Made me think I was crazy for questioning him. It took me 3 years to wake up, and by then, I'd lost almost everything. We talked for hours. Diane showed me text messages, financial records, court documents, screenshots of conversations between Brett and other women, other potential marks. A pattern emerged, one that made horrible sense. Brett targeted women with resources, sometimes romantic partners, sometimes their relatives. He'd charm his way in, establish trust, then systematically drain them. When they wised up or ran dry, he'd move on to the next target. The documents Diane showed me were devastating in their detail. Emails between Brett and a business partner, laughing about the money they were getting from the old ladies. Text messages where he called me the pension cow. A voice memo where he practiced sounding sincere while asking for loans, laughing afterward about how easy it was. "Does Rachel know?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "About your marriage? About Alexis?" Diane shook her head. I tried to reach out to her when I found out about the wedding, but Brett blocked my number on her phone. He monitors everything, her emails, her social media, her text messages. He's very good at isolating people from anyone who might tell them the truth. I even showed up at her workplace once, but Brett had apparently told security I was a stalker. They wouldn't let me past the front desk. Alexis leaned forward. "Mrs. Anderson, Margaret, my dad owes my mom over $200,000 in unpaid alimony and child support. He's been dodging it for years, moving around, hiding assets, working under the table. If you're giving him money, you're helping him avoid his responsibilities to me. Every dollar you give him is a dollar he's not giving to support his own daughter." "How old are you?" I asked Alexis. 17. I'll be 18 in March. Then he'll be off the hook for child support altogether. That's why he's been stalling in court, dragging everything out. Just needs to run out the clock." "I'm so sorry," I said. "I didn't know. I would never have—" "You didn't know because he's a professional liar," Alexis said, but not unkindly. "Mom and we don't blame you or Rachel. We blame him. But we need you to understand what you're dealing with." The weight of it crushed me. I'd been funding a man who was abandoning his own child. I'd been enabling Rachel to stay with someone who'd built their entire relationship on lies. I'd been so focused on being generous, being kind, being understanding, that I'd become complicit in something ugly. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Diane's answer was immediate. "You cut him off completely. You document everything. You protect your assets. And then you decide if you tell Rachel or let her figure it out herself." "How did you figure it out?" "Credit card bills," Diane said. "Charges from places I'd never been, for things I'd never bought. A hotel room when he said he was on a business trip to Dallas. Except the hotel was local. Restaurant charges for two when he said he was eating alone. Ashley Madison subscriptions, dating apps. By the time I confronted him, he'd racked up $50,000 in debt in my name." She looked at me with something like pity. "You're lucky you caught on when you did. You still have something left to protect." After they left, I sat with their revelations like they were physical weights pressing down on my chest. The evidence they'd shown me, the pattern they'd laid out, it all made a horrible kind of sense. All the pieces I'd been ignoring, all the red flags I'd explained away, they all fit together now into a picture I couldn't deny. I thought about Rachel, my beautiful, brilliant daughter who'd somehow become blind to the monster she'd married. I thought about Alexis, a child abandoned by her father while he played house with a new family. I thought about myself, a woman who'd worked her entire life to build a modest security, only to have it systematically stolen by someone who saw kindness as weakness. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the signs I'd missed, all the moments when I could have said something, but chose silence instead. The time Brett had claimed he needed money for his mother's medical bills, then Diane's revelation that his mother had been dead for 10 years. The way he'd pressured Rachel to quit her job, saying he made enough for both of them, then immediately started borrowing from me to cover their bills. The expensive clothes, the fancy dinners, the lifestyle that never quite matched up with his supposed income from consulting work that no one could ever quite define. I got up and made tea, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the kettle. My reflection in the kitchen window looked like a stranger. When had I become so small, so afraid? When had I decided that keeping peace was more important than keeping my dignity? The next day was Thanksgiving. I woke up to 3 missed calls from Rachel. I listened to the voicemails with my heart in my throat. The first was crying. "Mom, please call me back. I don't understand why you're doing this to us. Brett says you're trying to break us up. He says you've never approved of him, and now you're making up lies to turn me against him." The second was angry. "Brett says you've been talking to his crazy ex-wife. She's a liar, Mom. She's obsessed with him, and she's trying to turn you against us. You can't believe anything she says." The third was Brett's voice, using Rachel's phone. His tone was different from any I'd heard before. Cold, threatening. "Margaret, we need to talk about your recent behavior. Rachel's very upset. I think you owe her an apology. Also, we're planning to file a complaint against the Chicago PD for harassment, and we'll need your support as a witness. We'll also be consulting with an attorney about your defamatory statements to third parties about me. Call us back, today." I deleted all 3 messages. Instead, I called Patricia. She answered on the second ring, probably expecting me. "I need to take legal action," I said. "I need to protect myself, and I need to protect Rachel, even if she doesn't want my protection. And I need you to help me do it right." We met the day after Thanksgiving, in her office that smelled like coffee and old books. She'd already drawn up documents. A restraining order against Brett, preventing him from contacting me or coming to my property. A letter to Rachel, clearly outlining that all financial support was permanently withdrawn and why. A demand letter to Brett for repayment of the $43,000, which Patricia said we'd never see but would create a legal record. Documentation to send to the state's attorney about possible fraud charges. And this, she said, sliding a thick envelope across her desk. Information about coercive control and financial abuse. Studies, resources, hotlines, for Rachel, when she's ready to listen. "If she's ever ready," I said bitterly. Patricia looked at me with the kind eyes of someone who'd seen this story play out 1,000 times. "She will be." Women like Rachel, who are intelligent and capable but somehow end up with men like Brett, they eventually wake up. The question is whether they wake up before they've lost everything or after. Our job is to make sure there's something left for her when she does. I took the papers home and spent the weekend reading them. The statistics were staggering. Financial abuse occurs in 99% of domestic violence cases. Women over 60 are increasingly targets for financial exploitation, often by family members or romantic partners of their children. The average victim loses between $50,000 and $200,000 before realizing what's happening. I'd gotten off lucky, in a way. Only $43,000. Only. The word felt obscene. $43,000 was more than my annual pension. It was years of savings, years of sacrifice. Monday morning, I went to the courthouse and filed the restraining order. The clerk who helped me was a young woman, maybe 30, with kind eyes. She saw my shaking hands and said, "You're doing the right thing." "Am I?" I asked. "He's my daughter's husband. I might be destroying her marriage." "Ma'am," she said gently, "if telling the truth destroys something, then it was built on lies to begin with. You're not destroying anything. You're just shining a light on what's already there." The restraining order was served to Brett the next day. Rachel called me within an hour, screaming, "How could you? How could you do this to us? Brett hasn't done anything wrong. You're just a bitter old woman who can't stand to see me happy. You've always been jealous that I have someone and you're alone. This is about Dad, isn't it? You can't handle that I've moved on and found love again." Each word was a knife, but I'd been preparing for this. I let her scream herself out, listened to all of it, every accusation, every insult. Then I said, calmly as I could, "Rachel, I love you, but I won't set myself on fire to keep you warm anymore. When you're ready to see the truth about Brett, I'll be here. Until then, I have to protect myself." She hung up on me. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, silence. But last night, my doorbell rang. It was late, almost 10, and I almost didn't answer. But something made me look through the peephole. Rachel stood there alone, and she was crying. Not the angry crying from our fight, but the broken crying of someone whose world had just fallen apart. I opened the door, and she fell into my arms, sobbing like she used to when she was a little girl, and the world had been too much. I held her, stroked her hair, and didn't say anything. Just let her cry. She smelled like my daughter, like the lavender shampoo she'd been using since high school, and holding her like this, I felt my own tears start. Eventually, she pulled back. "Mom," she said. Her voice raw. "I found texts between Brett and some woman. He's been planning to divorce me and take half of everything. He's been setting it up for months, moving money around, hiding assets. And in the texts, he talked about you, about how stupid you were for trusting him, about how easy it would be to get more money from you once you apologized for the restraining order. He said," she choked on the words, "he said once he divorced me, he'd find another lonely widow with money and start all over again." I guided her to the couch, the same one where Diane and Alexis had sat weeks before. "Do you want to know the whole truth?" I asked. "Because there's more. Things I didn't tell you because I wanted you to see for yourself who Brett really is." She nodded, and I told her everything. About Diane and Alexis, about the pattern of financial abuse, about the $200,000 in unpaid child support, about the business deals that never existed and the mother who'd been dead for a decade, about all of it. With each revelation, Rachel seemed to shrink. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I thought I was being a good wife, supportive, understanding, but I was just being his accomplice, wasn't I? Helping him steal from you." "You didn't know," I said, "but I should have." She looked at me with eyes that suddenly seemed older, wiser. "The signs were all there. You tried to tell me. Jason and Linda tried to tell me, but I didn't want to hear it. I was so invested in my marriage being perfect, in proving that I'd chosen right, that I ignored everything that didn't fit that narrative." She wiped her eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry. For everything. For choosing him over you. For calling you selfish. For believing his lies instead of your truth. For all the money. God, all the money you gave us. Gave him. I didn't even know about half of it." I pulled her close again. "We have time to fix this," I said. "But first, you need to protect yourself. Financially, legally, emotionally." She nodded against my shoulder. "I already called a divorce attorney." "And Mom?" "I called Alexis. We're meeting for coffee tomorrow. I figure I should get to know my stepdaughter before I'm her ex-stepdad's ex-wife." She gave a weak laugh. "Is that even a thing?" Despite everything, I laughed too. It felt good, that laugh, like a muscle I'd forgotten how to use. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings. Rachel filed for divorce, citing financial infidelity and fraud. With Diane's help, we compiled evidence that Brett had been systematically defrauding multiple women, using marriage as a vehicle for theft. The state's attorney got involved. Suddenly, Brett's charming smile wasn't enough to save him. The evidence was overwhelming once we started digging. Rachel's divorce attorney, a sharp woman named Ms. Rodriguez, who specialized in cases involving financial abuse, uncovered bank accounts Brett had hidden, credit cards opened in Rachel's name that she'd never known about, loans taken out against assets he didn't own. Every discovery was another betrayal, another layer of deception peeled back to reveal something uglier underneath. We discovered that Rachel and I weren't his only victims. There were 3 other women he'd been seeing while married to Rachel, all of them providing him with money for various emergencies that never quite made sense. One had given him $15,000 for a supposed medical emergency. Another had co-signed a loan for a car that Brett had immediately sold for cash. A third had been paying his cell phone bill for 2 years, thinking she was helping out a friend going through hard times. Diane connected us with 2 of his previous ex-girlfriends who'd also been financially exploited. Together, we built a case that was impossible to ignore. We met once, all of us, in Ms. Rodriguez's conference room. 7 women of different ages, different backgrounds, different lives, all connected by one man's greed. Some cried, some were angry. But all of us felt that strange mixture of shame and relief. Shame that we'd been fooled. Relief that we weren't alone, weren't crazy, weren't the only ones who'd fallen for his lies. The day of his arraignment, I went to the courthouse. I didn't have to be there, but I wanted to. Rachel sat next to me on one side, Diane on the other, with Alexis next to her mother. 4 women, bound together by one man's greed and lies, presenting a united front. Brett was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit. When he saw us sitting together, his face went pale. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely afraid. The judge read the charges: fraud, theft by deception, failure to pay child support, violation of a restraining order. The list went on and on. He pled not guilty, of course. But his lawyer looked worried, and Brett's usual confidence was nowhere in sight. Outside the courthouse, the 4 of us stood in the Chicago winter sunshine. It was December now, cold enough that our breath made clouds in the air. Rachel held my hand on one side, Alexis on the other. "Thank you," Diane said to me, "for being brave enough to stop him, for protecting Rachel even when she didn't want protection." I shook my head. "You're the one who was brave. Coming to a stranger's house, risking rejection, just to warn me. That took real courage." Alexis spoke up, her young voice clear and strong. "My mom says that women have to protect each other because nobody else will. I used to think that was cynical, but now I get it. You all protected each other. You protected me even though you'd never met me. That's what women do," I said. "We survive, and we help each other survive." The trial was set for spring, but Brett's lawyer advised him to take a plea deal. 10 years for fraud and theft, with mandatory restitution payments. He'd be 70-something when he got out, with nothing to show for his decades of manipulation except a criminal record. Rachel's divorce was finalized in February. She moved back in with me temporarily, sleeping in her old room, helping with groceries and bills. We were learning to be mother and daughter again, instead of victim and accomplice. Those first few weeks of living together again were awkward. We'd dance around each other in the kitchen, both of us trying too hard to be normal. Rachel would apologize for things that didn't need apologizing for. "Can I use this towel? Is it okay if I have some of this coffee?" Like she was a guest in the house she'd grown up in, like she'd forfeited her right to belong here. It broke my heart. One morning, I found her crying in her old bedroom, surrounded by boxes of her things that Brett had finally allowed her to collect from their apartment. "Everything I built with him was a lie," she said. "Every memory is tainted. Every photo is evidence of my stupidity." I sat with her on the floor, surrounded by the remnants of her broken marriage, and I told her something I'd been learning myself. "You weren't stupid. You were human. You wanted to believe in love. There's nothing stupid about that." One night, as we sat in the living room watching old movies, she said, "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How did you know? How did you know when to stop being understanding and start being strong?" I thought about it for a long time. The movie played on, some classic we'd seen a dozen times, but neither of us was really watching. "I don't know that I did know," I said finally. "I think I just reached a point where the pain of staying the same was worse than the fear of change. Does that make sense?" She nodded. "I'm there now. It hurts, but it's a different kind of hurt. A clean hurt, like pulling out a splinter instead of letting it fester." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I used to think being strong meant never needing help, never admitting when you're hurt, never showing weakness. But watching you, Mom, I've learned that real strength is knowing when to ask for help, when to set boundaries, when to choose yourself, even when it costs you everything." In March, I did something I'd been thinking about for months. I took my Range Rover, the one that had started this whole mess, and I traded it in. For a modest sedan, something practical and reliable. With the money left over, I started a small scholarship fund at the elementary school where I'd taught, for kids who needed help with supplies, with field trips, with the little things that make education accessible. I named it the Resilience Scholarship. Because that's what I'd learned through all of this. Resilience. The ability to bend without breaking, to hurt without shattering, to love without losing yourself in the process. Rachel got a job at a nonprofit that helps women escaping financial abuse. She says it's her way of turning her pain into purpose. Diane and Alexis visit sometimes, and slowly, carefully, we're building something that looks almost like family. Not the family I'd imagined, but maybe something stronger, something chosen rather than assumed. I'm 68 now, and I'm learning to live for myself. Not selfishly, but self-fully. I take painting classes at the community center on Tuesday mornings. The instructor, a retired art teacher named Maurice, says I have a good eye for color. I'm not very good yet, but that's not the point. The point is that I'm doing something just for me, something that brings me joy without serving anyone else's needs. I volunteer at the library on Thursday afternoons, helping kids with their reading homework. Some of them remind me of my former students, eager and bright-eyed and full of questions. One little girl, Maria, told me last week that I was her favorite helper. It made me cry later, happy tears, because I'd forgotten what it felt like to be someone's favorite without having to pay for the privilege. I spend time with friends I'd neglected during my years of trying to fix everyone else's problems. Mrs. Chen and I have a weekly tea date now. There's a book club I joined at the senior center, and last month we went to see a matinee together. 6 women my age laughing like teenagers at a romantic comedy. I sleep well at night, without the weight of wondering who's taking advantage of me. My dreams are peaceful now, no longer haunted by unpaid debts and unanswered questions. Sometimes Rachel asks if I regret not seeing through Brett sooner. If I'm angry about the money I lost, the time I wasted, the trust that was broken. If I blame myself for not protecting her better, for not seeing the warning signs earlier. And honestly, I'm not angry. I'm grateful. Grateful that I woke up when I did. Grateful that I found my voice before I lost myself completely. Grateful for Diane's courage and Alexis's pain, and Rachel's eventual willingness to see the truth. Could I have acted sooner? Yes. Should I have trusted my instincts earlier? Probably. But I did the best I could with the information and emotional tools I had at the time, and that has to be enough. The money will come back slowly through restitution payments and careful budgeting. The trust might never fully heal, but I'm learning to trust myself again, and that's more important. And the time I lost? Well, I'm 68, not 98. I still have years ahead of me, years I plan to spend living for joy rather than obligation. Last week, I received a letter from the women's prison where Brett is serving his sentence. He wanted to apologize, he said, to make amends. His therapist suggested he write to the people he'd hurt. I read the letter once, then I burned it in my fireplace. Not out of anger, but out of indifference. His apology, sincere or not, didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I'd learned a lesson he never would. That real strength isn't about dominating others. It's about knowing your worth and protecting it, even when the cost is high. Especially when the cost is high. Rachel was here when I burned the letter. She watched the paper curl and blacken, and then she said, "I'm proud of you, Mom." "I'm proud of us," I corrected. "We survived. We're still here. And we're going to be okay." And we are. We're going to be okay. Maybe better than okay. I learned something important through all of this, something I want to share with anyone listening who might be in a similar situation. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. When your gut tells you something is wrong, listen to it. When setting a boundary costs you a relationship, that relationship was probably costing you more than you realized. And if you're being told you're selfish for protecting yourself, for refusing to bankrupt yourself emotionally or financially for someone else's benefit, that's not selfishness. That's survival, and survival is the first step toward thriving. So I ask you now, have you ever been in a situation where family loyalty cost you your peace? Where love felt like loss? Where you had to choose between being kind and being respected? Tell me in the comments, because your story might be the one that helps someone else find the courage to choose themselves. And if this story resonated with you, if you saw yourself or someone you love in my journey, hit that like button and subscribe. These stories need to reach the people who need them most, and your support makes that possible. Together, we can break the silence around financial abuse, family manipulation, and the courage it takes to rebuild a life on your own terms.